The government made no announcement, but the Bank of England now withdrew from battle.
At 4 o'clock, suddenly the Bank of England wasn't supporting pounds. Instead of a load of noise coming out of the voice brokers and everything and around the dealing room, everyone just sat in stunned silence for about 2 seconds or 3 seconds, and all of a sudden it erupted and sterling just free fell. That sense of awe that the markets could take on a central bank and actually win, I couldn't believe it.
So how many pounds have you sold?
About $500 million.
$500 million. So has it been good business?
Yeah, it's been really good.
What does that mean to the bank here?
We've had an excellent day. We've made a lot of money, so it's good.
What are we talking about, a couple of £100,000?
Probably about 10 million.
30 off for the pair.
The markets finally closed, and dealers still didn't know that the momentous decision to leave the ERM had been taken. For 3.5 hours, there was silence from the government. Treasury officials advised the Chancellor he shouldn't speak until a meeting was convened in Brussels with Britain's partners in the ERM.
I'd never previously been in a government that hadn't got an economic policy. It's a weakness in a government's position. I had never encountered a situation where, in that situation, the ministers, the political leaders of the government are accepting they can't tell the public anything about it. When it's all over the newspapers, every 10th-rate economic pundit in the country is in front of cameras explaining what he thinks is happening. Most of the reporting is coming from people who haven't the first idea what's going on, and the sense of hysteria and panic is no doubt spreading through the nation. We had just put up interest rates by a most phenomenal amount in one day, and nobody was saying anything.
The Prime Minister was reluctant to allow any government minister to speak. Instead, the Conservative Party chairman was summoned.
People did not want there to be any more detailed questioning of what the next steps would be and what the consequences were and so on and so forth. And clearly it was easier in some ways to put the party chairman up. He obviously couldn't be drawn to comment on any of the detailed economic consequences and what the next steps might be.
As I came in, Michael and Douglas and Ken put up this sort of low cheer, and I thought this was very odd. What are they cheering about? What then became evident, what they were cheering about, was that it had been decided that although the decision had been taken to go out of the ERM, that it was going to be myself who was going to appear on television that evening to explain it. And this rather kind of bizarre explanation was that there was this funny body called the Monetary Committee, who, frankly, I'd never heard of, and I'm sure 99 people out of 100 had never heard of, which sat in Brussels. And it was a group of officials who actually had to accept the resignation. It was sort of like a club, you know. You had to accept the resignation before it was official. So Norman Lamont had taken the view, well, if that's the case, I can't actually appear on television and answer questions until it's official. And if he couldn't appear, no other government minister could appear. So there was Fowler, party chairman, not in the government, absolute godsend. That's why they were cheering.
By this time, again, people like Michael Heseltine and myself were getting pretty fed up with the completely ridiculous politics of this. This is no way for a government to handle the media or to handle the explanation of such a serious decision. We managed to get reluctant agreement. I mean, I would just gone out and give interviews personally, but we got reluctant agreement from the whole gathering that Norman Lamont could go out, give a slightly forced and artificial short statement, say thank you very much, and come straight back inside, as long as he didn't answer questions. This was a fair old fiasco and added to the sense of, no doubt, unreal drama to the outside world.
Today has been an extremely difficult and turbulent day. Massive speculative flows have continued to disrupt the functioning of the exchange rate mechanism. As chairman of the Council of European Finance Ministers, I have called a meeting of the Monetary Committee in Brussels urgently tonight to consider how stability can be restored to the foreign exchange markets. In the meantime, the government has concluded that Britain's best interests are served by suspending our membership of the exchange rate mechanism. As a result, the second of the 2 interest rate increases that I sanctioned today will not take place tomorrow, and minimum lending rate will be at 12% until conditions become calmer. I will be reporting to Cabinet, discussing the situation with colleagues tomorrow, and may make further statements then. But until then, I have nothing further to say. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lamont, what about those in your party that are calling for your resignation?
Mr. Fowler, it's difficult to see this as anything other than a defeat and humiliation for the government and a blow to the credibility of the Prime Minister, is it?
No, I don't think it's any of those things. I think the fact of the matter is that the government has had to respond to quite an exception.
The Prime Minister telephoned Fleet Street editors. He was about to discover old allies had become enemies.
It was 7:30 on Wednesday evening. My secretary came to get me to tell me that the Prime Minister was on the line. Now, that's a sort of an unusual thing to happen, even in a busy tabloid office. And I couldn't, for the life of me, think what he wanted to talk about. We were up to our neck in God knows what, and the Prime Minister mysteriously can find a couple of minutes to come and chat to a tabloid tosspot. So, I pick up the phone, and he says,
hello, Kelvin, how are you?
And I said, fine, Prime Minister, how are you? And we swap a bit of chit-chat, and he says,
how are you going to play today?
And so I acted slightly dumb, and I said, in what sense, what do you mean?
He said, well, the big story, how are you going to play that?
I said, well, I have on my desk, Prime Minister, a great big bucket of shit.
He went, oh, yes.
And I said, I intend to pour it all over you tomorrow. And there's a sort of a pause the other end. And then he says,
oh, you are a wag.
John Major considered resigning, but didn't. Neither did Norman Lamont.
I recall calling the Treasury on the day after Black Wednesday and saying I'd like to see the Chancellor. Much to my surprise, at about 6 o'clock, I was called over, ushered into the Chancellor's rather grand room in the Treasury. He opened a bottle of white wine. We sat. He seemed incredibly relaxed. And I said, how do you feel after this terrible event? And he basically said, I feel fine. In fact, I haven't slept so well for months. Last night I didn't have to worry about the value of the pound. And it was extraordinary. Here was a policy that had been reduced to ashes at huge expense. And the Chancellor was saying the government would set another economic policy which put Britain's interests first.
During Black Wednesday, the Bank of England lost between £3 to £4 billion of public money, trying to keep the pound inside the ERM.
The day had been an utter fiasco as interest rates were going up and down like a whore's drawers. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor are like the Chief Executive and the Finance Director of a public company. They sit there and decide the big issues. And on this particular issue, they got it hopelessly and completely wrong. If they had been in business and they had lost even a tenth of the amount of money that they threw to try and sustain the quid, they would both have had to resign, and by the way, resign that day.
Mr. Kohler, do you think Germany's to blame for all this? How do you react to that?
In Brussels, the funeral rites were held for Britain's membership of the ERM.
Sir, is there going to be realignment?
Within a year, Norman Lamont would be removed as Chancellor. Despite John Major's prophecies, outside the ERM, the British economy would flourish and inflation stay low. When that happened, a sceptical public saw little reason to give John Major's government the credit.
Can you just tell us very briefly what you think this has achieved this meeting? No. Why not?
And so, Black Wednesday ended.
And what did the communique say? Locking out, sir, in the meeting.
Of all the political events I can think back on, That was the most important, that did change the course of British politics. And I spent my entire time as Chancellor really concentrating on two aims, trying to win back our reputation for competence, economic competence, trying to win back our reputation as a trustworthy government that could be trusted with the money. It also, of course, set off and inflamed all those crazy European arguments between the Eurosceptic rebellions, which in the end were the destruction of the government.
Black Wednesday happened because the currency dealers could see the conflict between the British economy, which needed one thing, and the German economy, which needed another. And then they reacted. As Britain considers whether to join a single European currency, the one question is, what's to stop it happening again? The speculators are waiting. They remember the fortunes they made on Black Wednesday.
It was $1 billion, in excess of $1 billion of profits, because we had a position approaching, I think, $10 billion, and the fall was more than 10%.
21!
40.